The scholar's voice sliced through the morning air like a blade through silk. "If the Buddha knows all things," he cried, "then answer, what is the origin of suffering?" Hundreds watched, breath held between faith and pride. The Buddha sat still beneath the Bodhi tree, eyes half open, face unmoving. Not a word came. Not even a sigh. The birds stopped singing. Even the wind bowed in confusion. The crowd murmured, some laughed, some frowned. Only one young monk, Ananda, felt something else, a trembling peace, a silent thunder in his chest. Was this silence ignorance? Or was it truth, too vast for sound? He prayed for an answer and received silence. But was that silence the answer itself? When the scholar's laughter broke the silence, it sounded hollow, like a drum with no skin. So, the enlightened one has no answer. He mocked. The crowd's tension cracked, some chuckled nervously. Others looked away, but the Buddha neither defended nor replied. His silence was not emptiness, it was depth. Ananda watched as even the proud scholar began to falter beneath that still gaze. There was something terrifying about peace, for reflected everything noisy within oneself. Later, when the crowd dispersed, Ananda approached quietly. "Master," he whispered, "why did you not speak? He mocked you before all." The Buddha turned his eyes toward him, eyes that seemed to see through lifetimes. "Ananda," he said softly, "words are arrows. Silence is the sky they fly through." Ananda bowed, confused yet moved. He wanted to understand, but his heart was still too loud. Night fell. The forest hummed softly. Ananda could not sleep. The question circled his thoughts like a restless bird. Was the Buddha's silence weakness? Or was it strength beyond reason? In the distance, he heard villagers arguing about the mute sage. He wanted to defend his master, yet something held him back, perhaps fear, perhaps respect for the silence itself. He watched the stars and wondered, maybe truth does not shout because it has no need to convince. At dawn, the Buddha walked alone through the forest path, each step a whisper in the dew. Ananda followed from afar, his heart still carrying questions. Suddenly, the Buddha paused and looked at a fallen leaf. "See, Ananda," he said, "this leaf has let go not because it was weak, but because it understood the wind." Ananda felt tears rise. The silence of the Buddha was not empty. It was filled with knowing. Ananda walked for days through the dusty plains of Magadha, the Buddha's silence still echoing inside him. Everywhere he went, people were talking, arguing about gods, money, crops, and truth. Every word seemed to fight another. One man claimed peace was found in wealth. Another shouted it was in sacrifice. Their tongues clashed like swords. Ananda listened, and the more he heard, the lonelier he felt. The world was full of voices, but none of them were truly listening. At a small temple, a group of preachers debated loudly about what the Buddha must have meant. They quoted verses they barely understood, competing to sound wise. Ananda stood silently at the edge, watching their faces twist with pride. He realized something: the louder a man tries to explain truth, the further it escapes him. That night, Ananda sat by a well where villagers whispered rumors that the Buddha had lost his power, that silence meant defeat. He closed his eyes and listened, not to their words, but to the emptiness between them. Beneath gossip, he felt the same hunger in every voice, the hunger to be right. And he understood, words are not born to reveal truth. They are born to defend the self. At dawn, Ananda met a wandering poet who claimed he could speak enlightenment. The poet's words were beautiful, flowing like the Ganges, yet when he finished, his eyes searched for applause. Ananda smiled sadly. He saw his own reflection in that man, the desire to be seen, not to see. He thanked him, bowed, and continued on his silent way. By evening, Ananda reached a quiet hill overlooking the valley. He sat watching the sunset burn the sky into gold and red. For the first time, he did not seek words, he simply breathed. He began to realize what his teacher knew, that silence is not emptiness, but fullness, the moment before all creation begins. He closed his eyes, and for one heartbeat, the world fell silent again. The monastery buzzed with new monks, and among them stood Devadatta, proud, brilliant, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. "Silence," he scoffed, "is a refuge for those without answers." His words spread like wildfire among the curious. Ananda listened from afar, sensing the rise of a storm. The Buddha, now older and calmer than ever, merely smiled. He had seen this fire before, the fire of those who mistake noise for truth. Devadatta began to teach in his own way, loudly, powerfully. He promised quicker enlightenment, stricter rules, stronger faith. His followers clapped and cheered. Ananda felt the pull of that confidence, the heat of charisma. But when he looked at the Buddha sitting silently nearby, he realized something. Truth doesn't demand followers. Illusion does. Jealousy grew like shadow at noon. Devadatta confronted the Buddha before all monks. "You hide your ignorance in silence," he shouted. The air trembled. The Buddha rose slowly, eyes soft. He said nothing, only bowed his head and walked away. That silence, calm, unbroken, struck Devadatta harder than any reply. The crowd's whispers felt heavier than judgment. That night, Devadatta sat alone under a flickering oil lamp. His hands shook as he muttered, "Why does his silence make me feel smaller?" Pride had turned into poison, yet he didn't see it. Outside, Ananda walked past and heard his words. For the first time, Ananda pitied him, for the man fighting silence was really fighting himself. Days later, Devadatta stood before the Buddha again, this time with trembling voice. "If you will not speak," he said, "then I will lead in your place." The Buddha looked at him, serene and radiant, and said gently, "Then lead." "Devadatta, if you believe the echo is louder than the mountain." The words were soft, but they fell like thunder. Devadatta bowed, not in respect, but in anger. The first crack in his heart had opened. It was a gray morning when he appeared, a wanderer clothed in dust, barefoot, his eyes shining with calm. He bowed before the Buddha and sat beside him without a word. Hours passed. No one spoke. Devadatta watched in irritation, Ananda in awe. When the stranger finally rose and walked away, the Buddha simply smiled. "He has said enough," the master murmured. But no one had heard a thing. Later, Ananda followed the wanderer into the forest. They walked side by side for miles, neither speaking. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the song of a bird seemed louder, clearer. Finally, Ananda whispered, "Who are you?" The wanderer looked at him gently and placed a finger over his lips. That single gesture felt like a temple bell struck inside his soul. By sunset, they stopped near a quiet stream. The wanderer sat, eyes closed, hands resting on knees. Ananda sat across, waiting for words that never came. Then he noticed the reflection of both faces on the water, perfectly still until a breeze rippled through. "Ah," he thought, "even reflection shatters when stirred." He bowed silently to the man who had taught him without speaking. The wanderer returned to the monastery that night and sat outside Devadatta's quarters. Not a word passed between them. Yet by dawn, Devadatta stormed out. Furious and trembling, "He mocked me with silence," he cried. The Buddha only looked at the wanderer and bowed slightly, for silence reveals each heart as it truly is, calm to the calm, chaos to the chaotic. Before leaving, the wanderer bowed once more to the Buddha. "Will you speak again?" Ananda asked softly. The stranger smiled, eyes gleaming with stillness. "You have not yet heard the silence," he whispered and vanished into the morning mist. Ananda stood frozen. For the first time, he understood that the Buddha's silence was not emptiness, but endless speech without sound. Devadatta's heart burned like a hidden fire. Every time he saw the Buddha's calm face, his anger deepened. "He defies me with stillness," he muttered. That night, beneath the fading moon, he summoned 2 of his followers. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we shall offer him food worthy of gods." But in his eyes lay the reflection of poison, the poison of pride that even gods cannot swallow. At dawn, Devadatta approached the Buddha, carrying the bowl of food. "For you, master," he said with forced humility. The Buddha accepted it without hesitation. As he lifted the first morsel to his lips, Ananda gasped. But the Buddha only smiled. "What is offered with hate returns as pain," he said gently, and ate. Devadatta froze. The words were calm, but the mirror they held was merciless. Hours later, Devadatta waited, but the Buddha did not fall. Instead, he continued teaching, radiant as ever. The poison had failed. Devadatta's own body trembled with rage. "His silence," he hissed, "turns my sin to ash." He stumbled into the forest, desperate to escape the soundless truth that followed him, the truth that cannot be outrun. Karma moves not through vengeance, but through reflection. By nightfall, Devadatta collapsed beside the riverbank. His reflection stared back, pale, trembling, pitiful. "Why does his peace destroy me?" he whispered. A gentle breeze rippled the water, shattering his image. In that moment, he understood. He had never fought the Buddha. He had only fought himself. And his greatest enemy had always been the echo of his own voice. The next morning, the Buddha stood on the same riverbank, gazing at the rippling surface. "All beings," he said softly to Ananda, "drink from the river of their deeds. Some taste sweetness, others bitterness, but all from the same water." Ananda bowed deeply, realizing that even Devadatta's fall was not punishment, but teaching. For in the silence of consequence lies the voice of truth. That evening, Ananda sat alone beside the quiet river. The air was heavy with the scent of wet earth and jasmine. He watched the ripples fade into calm, the moon trembling on the surface. All the teachings, all the sermons, all the questions, they seemed distant now, like voices in another dream. "If silence is the truth," he thought, "then maybe I have been deaf all along." A tear rolled down his cheek, not of sorrow, but of surrender. The night deepened. Crickets sang. A breeze brushed his face like a forgotten blessing. Ananda closed his eyes and let the world speak, not through sound, but through rhythm. He could feel the pulse of the earth beneath him, the heartbeat of every living thing. And then, for the first time, there was no listener and no sound. There was only stillness, infinite, alive, and kind. Visions rose in his mind, the scholar's laughter, Devadatta's anger, the wanderer's gaze, and the Buddha's silence. They all dissolved like smoke. Ananda finally understood. Silence was not absence, it was presence without boundary. The Buddha had never withheld answers, he had shown them, wordlessly, through his being. He awoke before dawn to the sound of silence itself, not empty, but vast. The world was reborn in stillness. Each leaf shimmered with dew like a star. Ananda stood, heart lighter than air. He finally knew what his teacher had seen, that truth cannot be spoken because it was never apart from the listener. It lives, it breathes, it simply is. When Ananda returned to the monastery, the Buddha was sitting beneath the same Bodhi tree, older now, but radiant as sunrise. Without a word, Ananda bowed and placed his forehead to the earth. The Buddha opened his eyes, and for a moment, teacher and disciple shared a silence deeper than speech, the silence where enlightenment listens to itself. The days grew softer, and the Buddha's steps slower. The monks whispered that his time was near. Yet there was no sorrow, only a peace that filled the air like the scent of lotus. As the sun sank beyond the forest, he turned to Ananda and said, "The body fades like a candle, but the flame is never lost. It returns to the sky." His voice was calm, weightless, the sound of wind passing through bamboo. That night, the Buddha lay beneath twin sal trees, their petals falling like snow. The air shimmered with silence. Ananda knelt beside him, trembling. "Master," he whispered, "you never answered the world's questions." The Buddha's eyes opened one last time. He smiled not with lips, but with being. "Ananda," he murmured, "the world never listened." As dawn approached, the monks gathered, their faces wet with quiet tears. The forest stood still, even the wind refused to move. A single bird sang, then stopped, as if realizing it had broken the spell. The Buddha's breath slowed, then vanished into the space between sounds. But in that vanishing, Ananda heard it, the living silence that had always been there. The next morning, Ananda sat alone by the river, the same river where Devadatta once fell. Its surface was still, its song eternal. He whispered, "Master, now I understand. Your silence was never emptiness. It was compassion too deep for sound." A tear touched the water and vanished. The ripples spread, silent and infinite. As the day ended, Ananda gathered the monks beneath the Bodhi tree. He closed his eyes and said, "Let us honor him not with chants, but with silence." And so they sat, hundreds of hearts breathing as one, wordless yet full. The wind carried no sound, only stillness. For in the Buddha's final silence, all the world finally heard.